ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures all.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. And welcome to Every Best Picture, where we go through every one of the Academy Award winners for Best Picture. This episode, we are talking about the life of Émile Zola.
Hey, before we begin, though, it'd be a great favor to us if you went ahead and subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews. Join us on this journey we're doing through every Best Picture, as well as many of the other reviews that we do here at Deep Dive Movie Reviews. And just as a reminder, we do spoilers here, so you have been warned. James?
Okay, so yes, this episode we are doing 1937's Best Picture winner, The Life of Émile Zola, starring Paul Muni as the revered French intellectual and writer, and directed by William Dieteri. So this is a big sort of glossy studio biopic, which essentially follows sort of the key moments in Zola's life, but particularly focuses on his involvement in what is known as the Dreyfuss Affair. So Steve, where do we begin talking about this? Should we lay out what the Dreyfuss Affair is a little bit, or
yeah, I think that's so integral to the film. Like I came into this film. This is one of the Best Picture films that I had not seen. I was totally unfamiliar with this film. I didn't know who Émile Zola was. I didn't even know what the context of the film was. That's how blind I was coming into this film. Having said that, I was pleasantly surprised to see that it was basically, especially in the latter half of the film, a courtroom drama, which I always love. You know me, A Few Good Men, give me a good, 12 Angry Men, give me a good courtroom drama. And this must be one of the earliest incarnations of the courtroom drama in a Best Picture nomination. And so, but because the case involved is integral, it might be good for the listener if we just, who may not be familiar with the story as I wasn't, if we just give a little background to the Dreyfuss Affair.
Okay, so yes, this is a court case or a scandal, really, that happened at the end of the 19th century, where a captain in the French army, Alfred Dreyfus, who was of Jewish descent, and that's really, really important, he was accused of treason. A letter surfaced that was apparently sent to the German government with sort of official secrets in there. Dreyfus was hauled up and convicted quite, speedily, accused of treason, and then shipped off to a place called, what's it called? Devil's Island in French Guiana, in South America.
Which I believe is where Patton, the story of Patton with Steve McQueen takes place. I think that's Devil's Island in French Guiana.
Papillon. You mean Papillon?
Papillon. I said Patton. Sorry.
I was like, Patton with Steve McQueen?
Yeah. No. Papillon, yes.
Ah, okay. Well, so that all makes sense, because obviously that is a French story about prisoners of war.
Wait, Patton isn't.
No, Patton is not. I was like, what's Patton got to do with a French prison island? But
Papillon.
Hey, Papillon for sure. So Dreyfus was left to rot, and then information surfaced that he not only was he not responsible. A guy called Georges Picard, not Jean-Luc Picard, Georges Picard, he sort of showed up and said, actually, the letter wasn't from Dreyfus, it was from a French army major, so a more senior officer, a guy called Ferdinand Wolfsin Esterhazy. But because this was such an embarrassment to the high command of the French military, and Esterhazy was kind of considered one of their own, high-ranking officer, not Jewish. They kind of swept it under the carpet. They tried Esterhazy, court-martialed him very, very quickly and exonerated him completely. And I think in the process actually ended up sort of doubling down on Dreyfus's sentence, extending it. And it just caused an absolute scandal in the French, in the entire French society, leading to Dreyfus's wife approaching Émile Zola, who was this renowned sort of academic and man of letters and what have you. Could you do anything to help? And he wrote this firestorm article, open letter in the paper titled "J'accuse," I accuse you, basically condemning the whole sort of French military. And it was at a time when, you know, the military was the most revered and glorified part of French society. You know, to even suggest that the French military was anything other than completely honorable and trustworthy was tantamount to treason in and of itself.
To accuse them was to accuse the state. You were the worst of the worst, which is why it polarized society. And I thought the film did a good job at showing how mob-like French society got over this issue.
Yeah, and how they sort of immediately sort of whipped up sort of anti-Zola sentiment, you know, and he had been regarded as you know, something of a national hero himself, albeit in a completely different medium, you know, as an intellectual. But it ended up with him sort of coming into court. The idea, the plan behind it was that he knew that by writing this letter, he would then get accused of libel, and that would be a whole new court case in and of itself. And during that court case, he would be able to pull this new evidence against Dreyfus into his own trial and expose the military high command. Things didn't go exactly as planned, but it did get the ball rolling. And in the end, Dreyfus was ultimately exonerated, and it led to a kind of real tipping of the balance in terms of where the power in French society lay, with the you know, the military on the out and the intellectuals on the way in. But it was a pivotal moment, but it certainly didn't change everything overnight.
Well, James, to start with, I just want to say I thought Paul Muni as the titular character did a wonderful job. You know, like I said, I knew nothing about Émile Zola, but to find this French intellectual, one of the little side stories that I enjoyed in this film was watching the self-deprecation that was happening when Émile Zola goes from this poor, striving person with all these ideals at the beginning of the film to being this very rich, successful, intellectual novelist who is definitely enjoying the luxuries of life, and occasionally will have old friends come and remind him, you know, you're supposed to be a man of the people. And essentially that's one of the reasons, I don't know if it specifically addresses this, but it seems like that is one of the reasons he gets involved in the Dreyfus case to begin with, is I feel for his own sake, he needs to show that he's willing to still buck the system a little bit, that he can't just you know, suck from the teat of success, but he has to give back to bring justice into the situation. And I love how the idea that because the government had closed this case, like, we are not going to open the Dreyfus case. This guy's off to Devil's Island. And that was hard to watch. When you think about a man who has given his whole life to dedication for France and for the army, and then to have him yanked from his wife, yanked from his child, and cast in a colony, a prison colony on an island, you know, 2,000 miles away. It's horrific to watch, and to see then the people who know that this is an injustice, willing to sweep it under the rug in order to protect the reputation of the state. I've often in this review show, when something hits me personally, you know, I come from that faith background, and for the last few years, if you're in my circles, you read about these large churches that are willing to overlook sexual harassment, sexual assault, even rape in some cases, to protect the reputation of the church, to protect the reputation of certain men and clergy at the top, at the expense of devastating people's lives. So when I was watching this, and it's really gotten my goat the last few years, like it's a nerve point for me. So when I was watching this film, I really was enjoying the whole idea of, you know, screw the system, screw you and your state and your military. You guys really, like, I loved when Zola went in and basically he instituted a libel suit, because the only way to get the Dreyfuss Affair to be brought back into the court was for him to be accused of libel, because then they have to bring it into the court. They have to talk about it. And that was Zola's whole strategy. The only way I can get us talking about this so that we can present evidence is for me to sacrifice myself. Like, if this goes pear-shaped, I'm going to be maybe not off to Devil's Island, but maybe just one above that. And he was willing to put himself on the line for that. So I guess that's a long way of saying that this movie really personally resonated with me in a really positive fashion.
That's great. Yeah, no, it is this story of sort of self-sacrifice, for the greater good, and so there's a little bit of kind of Tale of Two Cities almost, or something like that at the end of it. Yeah. But I think that the kind of context in which the film was made is almost as fascinating as the subject matter itself. I think the film seems to exist to discuss the Dreyfuss Affair. Yes, it's called The Life of Emile Zola, but it's not really a full birth to death biopic. It picks out a few little highlights, like you said, those early impoverished days with Cézanne, and then sort of the publication of sort of key texts and the motivation of those, and the scandal, the people he upset along the way. But then very quickly it gets into the Dreyfuss Affair, and it's like that's what it wanted to talk about. Now, at the time it was made was like 1936, 1937. So they're in the Great Depression. The Hays Code is kind of kicking in. The production code is kind of kicking in. So there's a degree of self-censorship within Hollywood going on at the moment. And Hollywood was accused multiple times at this time of self-censoring in order not to upset Nazi Germany, which is really interesting because the film was kind of seen as, on the one hand, a sort of a veiled dig, a thinly veiled dig at Nazi Germany, but at the same time seemed to pull its punches at the same time. There is no mention of anti-Semitism or even that any of the characters are Jewish overtly in the movie at all. And it was such a key element of the Dreyfus scandal. I mean, that's really what motivated all of it. On the one hand, it was this infallible military state, but on the other hand, it was just this ingrained anti-Semitism throughout society.
Which is interesting, James. I just got to cut in for a second because I could never imagine Hollywood self-censoring itself in order to appease an authoritarian government. I mean,
sure.
Surely that's not something that they would normally do.
Yes, it certainly it certainly sort of rings true in sort of recent years, shall we say, where they're sort of tiptoeing around certain perceived censorships and biases with certain markets they might want to.
Damn you, Canada!
That's it. Those Canadians. Every time. But it was so. Yeah. So there were critics of the film. It was a huge success when it came out, but there were critics of the film that were like, "Well, hang on a minute. How can you tell this story without sort of discussing the anti-Semitism element of it when it was so key?" And people perceived that to be, well, they don't want to upset Nazi Germany. And it wasn't like, oh, we wanted our films to play there specifically, but it was just a number of different sensibilities and ideas going on simultaneously in Hollywood at that time, where you had the Hays Code, where they were just trying to really sort of batten down the hatches on any kind of salacious material or sensationalist material at all. You've got a lot of sort of Jewish heads of studios, like Jack Warner in particular, head of Warner Brothers, where this movie was made, and who apparently were at that time didn't really want to rock the boat at all. They were quite sensitive of their position in society. But then you've also got, in this period, just after the Nazis have come to power, but before the war starts, you had a huge influx in Hollywood of German and East European talent, both in front of and behind the camera, because they're all like trying to get out there. Because when the Nazis took over the German film industry, which was hugely profitable and prolific at that time, they were like, we're going to turn this into a massive propaganda machine. They're called the Weimar years, I believe. Yeah. And they're like, a lot of people like Fritz Lang, to name just one, was just like, you know what? No, I'm getting out of here. And so they all moved to Hollywood, and that's how you got like the film noir period, because it was these German expressionist filmmakers coming over to Hollywood and using their sort of light and shadow sensibilities and their dark, twisted aesthetics and all the rest of it. And so you would think that a lot of those technical and artistic people would want to kind of take a swing, if you like, and have a dig. So it's weird, because it seems like on the one hand, there's a lot of reasons for this to be quite open and overt in its criticism. But it was this sort of difficult time politically where they weren't quite sure where Nazi Germany was heading and what its influence globally was going to be. And so the decision was made not to poke the bear with a big stick, if you like, but to actually to hold back. And I think I have to say, although, you know, I do like the movie, I have to say that it kind of feels like it's a little bit of a disservice to the story itself to not bring any of that up.
Yeah.
Particularly when you've got like Paul Muni, who's a Jewish actor of Austro-Hungarian descent. So he's kind of right in the mix. I mean, that he's from somewhere that would be in Ukraine right now, and that's where Esterházy was from. Esterházy was a Hungarian, and so his affiliations within the Dreyfuss Affair were seen to be far more towards Germany and that sort of thing, and that's why he turned out to actually be the spy. And so the fact that you got Paul Muni, who's from, you know, ethnically from that part of the world, but is a Jewish actor who has come over to Hollywood and is now starring as this sort of French whistleblower kind of character. It's hugely kind of complex.
Yeah, I don't think they use the word Jew at all in the film.
No,
in fact, the only time I actually saw Jew was when they showed the biography of Dreyfus, I think in one of the offices, when they pull his stats. And I forget if it said religion or ethnicity, but both my wife and I recognized that was the only time we saw the demarcation of Jew in the entire film, irregardless of the fact that the whole case is happening because he is not one of us, as you said.
Absolutely.
Let's use the Jew as the scapegoat and protect our own, which that's a strategy that's gone back to Cain and Abel, I think, you know.
Well, yeah, no, this is it. This is not sort of new, and nor is it in the past. So yeah, so for me, that's a kind of sort of fascinating behind the scenes element to the production that was all kind of happening simultaneously. That and the fact that the producers behind the scenes essentially wanted to repeat their success of The Life of Louis Pasteur that they had made the year before with Paul Muni, for which he won an Oscar and had become a big success. And it was the first biopic that real sort of big studio biopic that they'd made in a few years.
Yeah.
And it was a big success. And they were quite hesitant about doing it. And then when it turned out to be really big, they're like, right, let's do all of them. You know, let's do a lot of this. And so they even wanted to call this originally sort of the story of Émile Zola, you know, and they wanted to make it essentially exactly the same way. That's why they cast Paul Muni, and that's why they were going to cast the same actress as his wife that had played Louis Pasteur's wife, and all of these kind of elements. And they won with some of them, and they didn't win out with some of the other ones, the other choices that they made. But it was definitely an attempt to just repeat success that they had for the previous year, and arguably they did, and arguably this actually did even better. You know, this won Best Picture. And that's why we're talking about it.
It is. You know, as a supporting cast, James, Joseph Schildkraut, Joseph Schildkraut, who played Captain Alfred Dreyfus. I really enjoyed watching his performance because he carried such a naivete. He truly believed, like, you know, we always hear the stories during the Jewish Holocaust of all the Jews who we don't have to leave Germany, 1937, 38, 39, because we're Germans. We have thrown ourselves into our country. We love our country. We are Germans. And Dreyfus had this attitude. I am French. I am in the French military. I'm a captain in the French military. I've served my whole life for France. Surely no one would ever scapegoat me as a Jew and throw me off to Devil's Island. And he was able to convey such a, like I said, this naivety mixed with this stoic love for his family, always putting, you know, his wife, his children. Every time he would get up and he'd put his glasses on, there was just such a military preciseness about the character that I so loved. So at the end of the film, when he was finally released from Devil's Island, and they do a whole scene of that, and it was very cathartic to see that. And then him, you know, we saw the mob mentality, and I think I'm getting a little sidetracked again, because that whole mob mentality really resonates with me, coming from America, where we're seeing polarization without any facts or any evidence whatsoever. Zola is basically producing evidence to suggest Dreyfus is innocent, but people don't want to hear that narrative. Evidence is secondary to the narrative I want to believe. I want to believe the French military is without spot or blemish. I want to believe that the French government is without spot or blemish. And so I will scapegoat all of my anxiety, pain, fear, and I'll put it on this French Jewish captain. And what I see in America is, now it doesn't matter how much evidence is produced. I'd rather stick with the mob and go with the narrative that I want to believe in. And so it's very encouraging for me that in the end, good triumphed, that truth did come out, evidence did come out. It gives me hope that maybe in some of the situations we're in the world, maybe humanity will once again be able to tone down the voice of the mob, allow evidence, reason, and truth to rise again to the top. But bringing it back to the initial thought, when he is finally restored and we're seeing that same mob basically cheering him as he's getting his sword back, as he's getting the recognitions that he had been stripped of one by one earlier, get reinstated one by one again in front of his accusers and in front of French society. I found it very cathartic. So on a movie level, this film really resonated with me. I enjoyed it immensely. I feel like I'm drawing it to a close, like I'm ready to give my score on this. But yeah, that's just some thoughts I have about the life of Émile Zola.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that sort of shocked me when I was reading about it is that after Dreyfus was exonerated finally, or pardoned rather than being exonerated, he went back into the army and served throughout World War I before finally, hanging up his spurs. And I think he died in the 30s, which is kind of ridiculous that after that after the very hand that has punished him and
unjustly,
yeah. The prejudice to his face explicitly from this organization, from the military, and he's fully willing just to once he gets his life back, be like, yep, that's where I belong, that's what I believe in, I'm going to fight for my country alongside the very people, under the leadership of the very same people who had me locked up unfairly.
Yeah.
Which I think is, I'm not sure if I think that's remarkable and admirable or absolutely ridiculous. I'm not entirely sure where I stand on it.
The jury's still out in the James Marsh
yeah, I mean, on
moral
the
compass there, yeah.
I could not imagine that I would feel the same way, put it that way.
Yeah. But I think about guys like Dreyfus, it was more of a shame-based society. He had been shamed, and there's that shame and honor. And you could see where if enough honor comes back in, it would shift. I think guys like him engage the world in a different way than you and I do in the 21st century. We're affected by different things. And that's why I enjoy films like this, because I get to see someone who embraces the world in a way that I don't. And I'm not talking about good or evil, like, he's good and I'm bad or something like that, but just it's a different perspective or a different framework of engaging the world. And that's the great thing about films. We're reviewing films that are nearly 100 years old, is we get to see a certain perspective of what people valued during a certain period. Because although this film, it's essentially a biopic of something that was much more recent in their own timeline. It'd be like us doing a film about the Reagan assassination and the courts. They're much closer to it than we are. And so again, I appreciate when a film is made really well, it offers us a little peephole into society, almost like a time capsule.
Yeah, and arguably I find that side of it sort of just as, if not more so, interesting than the actual subject matter of the film itself. I mean, just a couple of other sort of little interesting things. I mean, obviously, Schildkraut won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar for his performance. I thought it was interesting that Vladimir Sokolov, who played Cezanne, was a last-minute sort of post-production replacement.
Oh,
Then actually they'd shot all the scenes beforehand with Ben Weldon and a different actor called Ben Weldon, and they were just unsatisfied with the performance, and so they went back later and recast the role and did it all again, like very sort of late in the day. And then I think you have to kind of acknowledge that in true Hollywood fashion, the way that things wrap up in the film are not quite how things.
No, it's a little liberties were taken.
Some liberties were taken. You know, it wasn't quite so quick that that Dreyfus got out. You know, there was a lot more sort of back and forth.
The mechanisms of bureaucracy are slower than a film reel. You know,
exactly. You know, by the time Muni has given his sort of 6-minute single take speech in front of the courtroom, you just want things to all the dominoes to fall down and to have your ending. The idea that that Zola dies like the same day Dreyfus returns to France and misses him by minutes is not, I believe, how things. But
what a tragic end to die because of a carbon monoxide leak in your house. The chimney.
No, apparently years later there was, you know, suspicion was thrown over it, and there were kind of wild allegations of murder and deliberately blocked chimneys and what have you. But I don't think they've come down definitively one side or the other.
Sure.
But yeah, there's certainly some element of suspicion over his death. So at the 10th Academy Awards, The Life of Emile Zola did set a new record. It became the first film to get double-digit nominations. It got 10 nominations and then won 3 awards. It won Best Picture, it won Best Supporting Actor, as I said, and it also won Best Screenplay. But yes, was nominated in numerous other categories, including Best Director, Best Actor for Muni, who had just won the previous year, and score for Max Steiner, who obviously became a hugely successful, or was already a hugely successful composer. But and other than that, so we do get to the question now. Here we are, almost 100 years later. What do we think? Does it stand the test of time? Does it deserve to be remembered and recognized, as it clearly was at the time? And so, Steve, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll start us off. I think it's no surprise of what I've said so far that I absolutely feel this stands the test of time. It deserves its place in Hollywood history. I thought it was a delightful story. Like I said, anything that mixes French intellectualism with courtroom drama, with injustice and scapegoating and good prevailing in the end, sign me up for. I thought Paul Muni did a wonderful job bringing Émile Zola to life. Joseph Schildkraut, and again, Joseph Schildkraut as Captain Alfred Dreyfus, I thought delivered a wonderful supporting performance, as you noted, and he won the Oscar for that. So yes, absolutely it does. I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen The Life of Emile Zola, as I had not, that you take the time, because it is truly worth sitting down and giving it a watch.
Similarly, I hadn't seen it before, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. You know, it's a romping, hugely entertaining, very polished studio biopic, the likes of which we have grown to become very used to. Paul Muni is great. You know, he was pretty much the Daniel Day-Lewis of the 1930s. You know, he was as close to a method actor as there was, really. You know, he was the guy who could pick exactly the roles that he wanted to, unlike pretty much any of his contemporaries, and knocks it out of the park again and again and again. You know, there are some weird motivations going on behind the scenes about sort of what they choose to discuss and what they choose not to discuss. And, I don't have a clear definitive answer for that, other than it does seem that they tried to sidestep the anti-Semitism explicitly in order not to anger the Nazis. But who wouldn't want to anger the Nazis in hindsight? All that says, you know, the beauty of hindsight and whatever. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it, more than I was expecting to. I didn't really know a great deal about him, other than vague murmurings of the Dreyfuss Affair, which I had some idea of what it was about, but not details. Yeah, and I thought it was great fun. So yes, it stands the test of time. It's very entertaining, and you should check it out.
Well, there you have it. You've heard what we have to say about 1937's The Life of Emile Zola. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do you agree with what we brought forth, or do you have some perspectives of your own? We'd love to hear them. James?
That's right. Do check out some of the other films we have, the other film reviews that we have in every Best Picture series, as we are going through every single one of the Best Picture winners. Let us know what else you'd like us to review. Any other series that you think you'd like our opinions on. In the meantime, check out all of our other videos. We cover a lot of new releases. Let us know in the comments, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Till next episode.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.